The shrimp cocktail was as stale as my marriage, but at least the wine was decent. I sat at the far end of the company Christmas party table, watching my wife, Lena, sparkle like the fake snow scattered across the hotel ballroom. She wore that emerald green dress that used to make my heart skip. Now it just made my stomach turn, especially when I saw how Richard Drayton's eyes devoured every curve. "Gray, you're awfully quiet tonight," Maya Chen chirped from across the table, her voice cutting through the jazz trio's rendition of Silver Bells. She was Lena's work bestie, the kind of woman who collected office gossip like vintage wine. "Cat got your tongue?" "Just enjoying the show," I replied, taking another sip of the surprisingly good Cabernet. The Winter Wonderland theme was over the top. Twinkling lights everywhere, artificial snow, ice sculptures that were already melting under the ballroom's heat. 50-plus employees of Drayton Industries crammed around circular tables, all pretending this was the highlight of their year. Richard stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. At 45, he still thought he was God's gift to corporate America. Expensive suit, perfectly styled silver hair, the kind of confident smile that made shareholders open their wallets. He was already 3 drinks in, judging by the slight sway in his stance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, tapping his champagne flute with a butter knife, "I'd like to make a toast." The room quieted, conversations dying mid-sentence. I noticed how Lena's face lit up, how she straightened in her chair like a student hoping to be called on by her favorite teacher. My wife, the marketing director who'd worked her way up from junior associate in just 4 years. Beautiful, ambitious, and apparently willing to do whatever it took to climb that corporate ladder. "To Lena Foster," Richard continued, his voice carrying that practiced authority that came from years of boardroom presentations. "The woman who truly keeps this company running. She works late for me, stays dedicated to every project, goes above and beyond in ways that," he paused, letting his eyes linger on her face. "Well, let's just say her husband is a very lucky man." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The crowd chuckled politely. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. But Richard wasn't done. He moved behind Lena's chair, placing his hands on her shoulders. "How lucky are you, Gray?" he called out, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Having a wife who's so committed to her work." More laughter, though I caught a few uncomfortable glances. Miss Hopkins from HR shifted nervously in her seat, adjusting her glasses. She'd been with the company for 15 years and had seen this routine before. Richard's barely concealed advances disguised as professional appreciation. Then he did it. Leaned down and kissed my wife full on the lips right there in front of everyone. Not a quick peck on the cheek, but a lingering possessive kiss that made several people reach for their phones. Camera flashes went off. Someone whistled. Lena didn't pull away fast enough. Hell, she didn't pull away at all until the kiss ended naturally. And even then, she giggled. Actually giggled like a schoolgirl getting attention from the quarterback. "Richard," she said, her voice breathy and flushed. "You're terrible." "Guilty as charged," he replied, squeezing her shoulders before returning to his seat. But seriously, folks, where would we be without dedication like hers? Maya leaned across the table toward me, her voice low but audible. "You just gonna take that, Gray?" I mean, that was pretty inappropriate, even for Richard. I set down my wine glass carefully, pulled out my phone, and made a few notes. Tomorrow's date, 9 hour. The time I'd been planning for this moment for weeks. Tomorrow, I said quietly, meeting her curious gaze. 900 a.m. sharp. The conversation moved on, but I caught fragments of whispered gossip from nearby tables. Did you see that? Right in front of her husband. I can't believe she let him. Poor Gray, poor Gray. If only they knew. Richard raised his glass again, this time directing his attention specifically to me. Gray, my friend, you must be so proud. Lena tells me, you're between jobs right now? Consulting work, was it? The question was designed to embarrass me, to highlight the contrast between his success and my apparent lack thereof. Everyone knew Richard made 7 figures. Everyone assumed I was struggling, living off my wife's income. The classic underachieving husband. Something like that, I replied evenly. Well, if you ever need a reference, just let me know. I'd be happy to tell potential employers what an accommodating man you are. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. Several people laughed outright now, emboldened by their CEO's obvious mockery. I saw Lena's face flush deeper, though whether from embarrassment or excitement, I couldn't tell anymore. That's very generous of you, Richard, I said, raising my own glass. I'll definitely keep that in mind. The evening continued with the usual corporate party rituals, awkward dancing, too much alcohol, and increasingly inappropriate behavior from the leadership table. Richard kept finding excuses to touch Lena, adjusting her necklace, guiding her to the dance floor, whispering in her ear during the speeches. By 10 p.m., I'd had enough entertainment for one lifetime. I'm heading home, I announced, standing up from the table. Already? Lena looked up at me with those green eyes that used to make me forget my own name. The party's just getting started. Early morning tomorrow, I said. Big day ahead. I'll catch a ride with Maya, she said quickly, not wanting to leave her moment in the spotlight. Don't wait up, don't wait up. The words every husband loves to hear at a Christmas party where his wife is being publicly groped by her boss. Wouldn't dream of it, I replied. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Richard's voice boom across the ballroom one more time. There goes the most understanding husband in New England, folks. Let's hear it for Gray Foster. Scattered applause followed me out. I smiled to myself as the hotel doors closed behind me, muffling the sounds of the party. The snow was falling steadily now, coating the city in pristine white. Perfect weather for what was coming. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Miles Abrams, my old Army buddy, who transitioned from military intelligence to cybersecurity consulting. It's time. Execute tomorrow at Oro 900. His response came back immediately. Roger that. The trap is set. 18 months of planning. 18 months of playing the role of the clueless, underachieving husband while I quietly acquired controlling interest in Drayton Industries through a series of shell companies and silent partnerships. 18 months of letting Richard humiliate me in public while I gathered evidence of his systematic harassment of female employees. 18 months of watching my wife transform from the woman I married into someone I barely recognized. Tomorrow the performance would end. Tomorrow they'd learned that the most understanding husband in New England had been taking very detailed notes. I drove home through the empty streets. Christmas lights twinkling in windows, families gathered around dinner tables and television sets. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that in a few hours, the corporate world of our small city would be turned completely upside down. The house was dark when I arrived, just as I'd expected. Lena wouldn't be home until well after midnight, if at all. I poured myself a scotch, the good stuff I kept hidden in my study, and reviewed the files one more time. Intimate harassment complaints dating back 5 years. Security footage from the upgraded cameras I'd had installed throughout the building. Financial records showing Richard's pattern of promoting women who played along and sabotaging those who didn't. Email chains that would make a sailor blush. And now, thanks to tonight's performance, I had a room full of witnesses to add to the pile. I raised my glass in a toast to the empty house. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Tomorrow's going to be quite a show. Richard Drayton's keycard failed at 8:47 a.m. I watched from the security office as he stood in the marble lobby, swiping the card repeatedly against the executive elevator reader. His usually perfect hair was disheveled from last night's party, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands. Whether from hangover or growing panic, I couldn't tell. "Sir." The receptionist's voice carried just enough smugness to let me know she was enjoying this. Jennifer Walsh had been fielding complaints about Richard for 3 years, always told to handle it quietly by the previous board. "The system shows your access has been revoked." "Revoked?" Richard's voice cracked slightly. "That's impossible. I'm the CEO of this company. The new owner would like to see you, sir." Top floor conference room. I had to give him credit. He maintained his composure as he rode the elevator up, probably running through scenarios in his head, trying to figure out what was happening. The security cameras showed him straightening his tie, practicing his confident smile, preparing to charm his way out of whatever corporate reshuffling was taking place. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive conference room where I sat behind what used to be his desk. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the 3 board members I'd flown in for this occasion. Margaret Santos from our Boston office, David Kim from Chicago, and Patricia Williams, the former HR director, who'd been quietly documenting Richard's behavior for years before being forced into early retirement. "Surprise," I said, not looking up from the papers spread across the mahogany desk. "Please have a seat." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. "Gray, what the hell are you doing in my office?" "My office, actually." I finally looked up, meeting his confused stare with calm satisfaction. "I acquired this company last month. Silent buyout through a series of holding companies, 78% controlling interest. You've been working for me for 4 weeks now, Richard. How's that for irony?" The color drained from his face. That's impossible. You're unemployed. You're living off Lena's salary." "Consulting work," I said, echoing his words from last night. "Turns out military intelligence training translates well to corporate acquisitions." "Who knew?" Margaret Santos cleared her throat. "Mr. Drayton, we need to discuss your employment status." I pressed a button on the laptop, and the wall-mounted screen came to life. Security footage from the past 6 months filled the display. Richard cornering female employees in empty conference rooms, his hands wandering during mentoring sessions, his pattern of late-night meetings that had nothing to do with business. "Intimate harassment," I said matter-of-factly. 47 documented incidents over the past 5 years, all captured on the upgraded security system I had installed 3 months ago. High definition, excellent audio quality. The lawyers tell me it's more than enough for criminal charges, not just civil liability. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed into the chair across from me, his face now completely white. "Gray, listen. We can work this out. Whatever you think you saw, I think I saw you intimately assault my wife in front of 50 witnesses last night." I clicked to the next slide, showing stills from various phones at the party. But that was just the finale, the grand performance that tied everything together. The conference room door opened and Ms. Hopkins entered with a thick folder. Behind her came Lena and Maya, both looking confused and slightly hungover from the previous evening's festivities. "What's going on?" Lena demanded, then stopped short when she saw me behind the executive desk. "Gray, why are you bought the company to protect you?" I said simply. "Didn't expect I'd need to protect you from yourself." I clicked to the next presentation slide, and Lena's face appeared on screen. Security footage from 3 weeks ago. Her and Richard in his office after hours. His hands tangled in her hair, her legs wrapped around his waist as he pressed her against the window overlooking the city. Maya gasped. Miss Hopkins made a note in her folder. The board members maintained their professional composure, but I caught David Kim shaking his head in disgust. Gray, I can explain. Lena started. Don't. I held up a hand to stop her. Just don't. More footage played. Weeks of after-hours encounters. Hotel receipts charged to company accounts. Text messages recovered from the company server. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Richard tried one last desperate play. This is entrapment. You can't, I can. And I did. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. You're fired for cause. Effective immediately. No severance package. No golden parachute. No references. Security will escort you from the building. You bastard. Richard lunged across the desk, his composure finally cracking completely. You set me up. 2 security guards appeared as if by magic. I'd had them waiting just outside the door. They grabbed Richard's arms before he could reach me, hauling him backward as he struggled and cursed. You planned this? He screamed. This whole thing was a setup. No, I said calmly. You planned this. I just documented it. As the guards dragged Richard toward the elevator, another figure appeared in the doorway. His wife, Catherine Drayton, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. She'd been waiting in my outer office for the past 20 minutes. Thank you, Gray, she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of humiliation. The divorce papers were filed an hour ago. My attorney will be in touch about the evidence. She walked over to her husband, now restrained between 2 security guards, and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. 22 years, she said. 22 years. I pretended not to know. Not anymore. Catherine turned and walked out without another word, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Richard's struggles became more frantic, but the security team was professional and efficient. Within minutes, he was gone. The conference room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Lena stood frozen by the door, her face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, fear, and something that might have been admiration. The board has voted, Margaret Santos announced, breaking the silence. Richard Drayton's employment is terminated for cause. All company policies regarding workplace harassment will be strictly enforced going forward. What about me? Lena's voice was barely a whisper. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved, married, built a life with. The woman who'd thrown it all away for a corner office and the attention of a predator. You're not fired, I said finally. Yet. But you're being transferred. Demotion to junior associate effective immediately. You'll report to Patricia Williams, our new director of human resources. You can't do this to me. I can and I am. I gathered my papers, preparing to leave. The board witnessed everything, Lena. Your career advancement through intimate favors is well documented. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges for corporate fraud. Maya, who'd been silent through the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. This isn't fair, Gray. Lena was manipulated by Richard. She's a victim here. I turned to face Maya, pulling out my phone and scrolling through emails. Interesting perspective. Tell me, Maya, were you also being manipulated when you helped cover up the harassment complaints? When you scheduled those convenient late meetings? When you booked the hotel rooms? Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Company email server Maya. Everything's archived. I showed her the phone screen, her own words, discussing how to hide Richard's behavior, how to discredit women who complained, how to ensure Lena got promoted over more qualified candidates. HR will be conducting a full investigation into your role as an enabler, Patricia Williams said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. We'll be in touch. Maya looked around the room desperately, seeking support that wasn't coming. Lena, tell them. Tell them I was just following orders. But Lena was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of fear and grudging respect. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been planning this? I considered the question. Since the first time you came home late and lied about where you'd been? Since the first time you defended him when I mentioned the harassment rumors? Since the first time you chose him over me? You did. Every day for 18 months, you chose him, his attention, his promises, his version of success. I walked toward the door, pausing beside her. I just gave you what you wanted, a front row seat to watch your career implode. The elevator doors closed on a conference room full of stunned faces. As I descended toward the lobby, I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Richard was destroyed, Lena was exposed, and their enabler was facing her own reckoning. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. By noon, the entire office knew. Corporate gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and the story of Richard Drayton's spectacular downfall was too juicy to contain. I watched from my new corner office as clusters of employees gathered around desks, voices hushed but animated, phones buzzing with text messages and social media updates. Lena's new workspace was a cubicle in the middle of the bullpen, right next to the constantly humming copy machine. No door, no privacy, no escape from the whispers and stares. I'd specifically chosen that location. Maximum visibility for minimum comfort. Patricia Williams had wasted no time implementing new protocols. Every employee received an email outlining the company's zero-tolerance harassment policy, along with anonymous reporting procedures and mandatory training sessions. The message was clear. The old regime was dead. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Package delivered to parking garage. Merry Christmas. I smiled and made my way down to the underground garage, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. I needed the exercise, and I wanted time to think about the next phase of my plan. Richard's silver Porsche sat in its reserved spot near the elevator, still bearing the arrogant vanity plate CEORD. The car was his pride and joy, a symbol of his success and power. He'd bragged about it constantly, showing off the custom interior and high-performance engine to anyone who'd listen. Miles had done excellent work. The scratch along the driver's side was deep and deliberate, spelling out pervert in letters 3 and tall. The windows were soaked with additional messages. Harasser on the windshield, predator on the rear window. I walked past the car, whistling jingle bells softly to myself, and accidentally dropped my keys near the passenger door. As I bent to retrieve them, my wedding ring scraped against the paint, adding one final insult to the masterpiece. Oops, I murmured to the empty garage. Back in my office, I reviewed the afternoon's agenda. The board meeting at 2 o'clock would formalize the leadership transition and approve the new harassment policies. At 3, I had a conference call with our insurance company to discuss liability coverage for the Richard situation. And at 4 o'clock, Lena would be attending her first mandatory counseling session with HR. Maya knocked on my door at 1:30, looking haggarded and desperate. Her usual polished appearance was cracking, mascara slightly smudged, Hair less than perfect, the kind of small details that revealed how much pressure she was under. "Gray, can we talk?" "Of course. Please sit down." She perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. "I want to apologize for everything. I know I made mistakes. But I was just trying to survive in a toxic environment." "I understand," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Survival instincts are powerful. I have information," she said quickly, "about other things, other employees who were harassed, other cover-ups. I can help you clean house completely." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Maya was smart, ambitious, and utterly without loyalty when her own interests were at stake. She'd thrown Lena under the bus to save herself, and now she was trying to negotiate her way out of consequences. "That's very helpful, Maya. I'm sure Patricia will want to hear everything you have to say. But what about me? What about my job? What about it? Am I going to be fired?" I considered the question carefully. Maya was a symptom of the disease, not the cause. She'd enabled Richard's behavior because it benefited her career. But she wasn't the architect of the system. "That depends," I said finally, "on how cooperative you are with the investigation, on how honest you're willing to be about your role in everything that happened, and on whether you can learn to be a better person." She nodded eagerly. "I can do that. I can be better. We'll see." After Maya left, I turned my attention to the company-wide memo I'd been drafting. The message needed to be clear but diplomatic, establishing new leadership while avoiding legal liability. "Dear team," I began typing, "effective immediately. I am assuming the role of CEO of Drayton Industries. Recent events have necessitated significant changes in our leadership structure and corporate policies. We are committed to creating a safe, respectful workplace for all employees." The afternoon board meeting went smoothly. Margaret, David, and Patricia were all experienced executives who understood the delicate balance between justice and business continuity. We approved new policies, established reporting procedures, and began planning the transition strategy. "What about the Christmas party footage?" David asked. "It's already starting to appear on social media." "Let it," I replied. "Transparency is our friend here. We're the company that took decisive action against harassment. We're the good guys in this story." Patricia nodded approvingly. "The narrative matters. We need to control the message before someone else does." By 4 o'clock, word had spread beyond our building. Local business reporters were calling for statements, and the company's stock price was fluctuating as investors tried to understand what was happening. I fielded calls from curious competitors, concerned clients, and at least 3 headhunters who assumed I'd be looking for new leadership talent. Lena appeared in my doorway at 5:30, looking exhausted and defeated. Her mandatory HR session had clearly not gone well. "Can I come in?" "It's your company too," I said, not looking up from my computer. "Well, technically, it's my company, but you're still an employee." She closed the door behind her and sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "They want me to attend counseling weekly sessions about professional boundaries and appropriate workplace relationships." "Sounds reasonable." "Gray, look at me." I saved my document and turned to face her. Lena looked older than she had that morning, the stress and humiliation aging her in real time. Her perfect makeup was gone, replaced by the kind of raw vulnerability I hadn't seen in months. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for everything." "Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Lena's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something resembling honesty. "Both," she admitted. I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'm sorry I was stupid enough to think I wouldn't get caught. At least you're being honest. What happens now to us? I mean, I'd been dreading this conversation, even though I'd known it was inevitable. The personal and professional were hopelessly intertwined now, and there was no clean way to separate them. I don't know, I said truthfully. I can't look at you the same way anymore, Lena. Every time I see you, I think about those security videos. Every time you speak, I wonder if you're lying. Tears started forming in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Richard said he was going to leave his wife, that we could be together openly. He said he loved me. He said a lot of things to a lot of women. That's what predators do. I know that now. Do you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what was left of her mascara. I deserve that. I deserve all of this. Yes, I agreed. You do? The brutal honesty seemed to shock her. She'd probably expected me to comfort her, to minimize her responsibility, to play the understanding husband one more time. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while, she said after a long pause. Give you some space to think. That's probably best. She stood to leave, then turned back at the door. For what it's worth, I am impressed. What you did today, it was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant. Thank you. I always knew you were smarter than you pretended to be. I just never thought you'd use it against me. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over the city. The building was mostly empty now, just the cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics burning the midnight oil. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media attention, employee concerns, the complex work of rebuilding a company's culture. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor the victory. Richard was destroyed, his career and marriage in ruins. Lena was facing the consequences of her choices, her reputation shattered and her future uncertain. Maya was scrambling to save herself, ready to betray anyone for a chance at survival. I poured myself a scotch from the bottle I'd moved into the executive bar and raised it in a toast to the empty office. Phase 1 complete, I said to the darkness. Time for Phase 2. Richard's apartment was a testament to arrested development. Leather furniture that screamed bachelor pad, sports memorabilia covering every wall, and a wet bar that had seen more action than a downtown nightclub. I knew this because Miles had been monitoring the building's security system for the past month, mapping Richard's routines and vulnerabilities. It was 8 p.m. when I received the text. Target acquired, initiating digital harassment protocol. I was sitting in my car across the street, watching Richard's windows through binoculars. He'd been drinking since he got home. I could see him stumbling around his living room, probably trying to figure out how his perfect life had imploded in a single morning. Miles was a genius with technology, a skill he developed during our Army days and refined through years of corporate consulting. Richard's smart home system was connected to the internet, which meant it was vulnerable to someone with the right knowledge and motivation. The first sign of trouble was the thermostat. Richard's apartment temperature dropped from a comfortable 72 degrees to a frigid 55 in a matter of minutes. Through my binoculars, I watched him check the control panel, pressing buttons frantically as his breath began to fog in the suddenly cold air. Next came the sound system. Every speaker in the apartment began playing Christmas music at maximum volume, specifically Silent Night on endless repeat. The building's other residents would be calling the landlord within minutes. The smart lights were the final touch. They began strobing in a seizure-inducing pattern while changing colors rapidly. Red, green, white, blue. like a demented Christmas display. Richard's silhouette moved frantically from room to room, trying to regain control of his own home. My phone buzzed with a message from Miles. Phase 1 complete. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved Richard's precious Porsche. Miles had installed a small device under the hood that could remotely disable the engine and trigger the alarm system. As I watched, the car's lights began flashing, and the horn started blaring in the parking garage below Richard's building. The beauty of the plan was its deniability. Everything could be explained as technical malfunctions or coincidental failures. No laws were being broken. No property was being permanently damaged. It was just a series of unfortunate events that would make Richard's life miserable for the foreseeable future. By 9 p.m., Richard had given up trying to fix his apartment and was heading for the parking garage. I started my car and followed at a distance, curious to see how he'd react to the next phase of his punishment. The Porsche was a mess. Someone, definitely not me or Miles. We had alibis, had covered it with shaving cream and toilet paper. Pervert was written across the windshield in what appeared to be lipstick. And all 4 tires had been deflated. Not slashed, just deflated. Another technically legal form of harassment. Richard stood in front of his ruined car for several minutes, his shoulders shaking with rage or despair. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language suggested it wasn't going well. 20 minutes later, Lena arrived. I hadn't expected this development, but it made sense in a twisted way. Richard was desperate and isolated, reaching out to his former partner in crime. Lena was probably feeling guilty and confused, still processing the day's revelations. They talked for about 10 minutes beside the vandalized car. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read their body language. Richard pleading, gesturing wildly. Lena shaking her head and backing away, whatever he was asking for. She wasn't willing to give it. The conversation ended with Lena walking away, leaving Richard alone with his destroyed vehicle. He kicked one of the deflated tires in frustration, then pulled out his phone again. This time, he called a cab. I followed the taxi through downtown, maintaining a careful distance. Richard was heading toward the business district, probably planning to drink away his sorrows at one of the upscale bars near the office. It was exactly the kind of predictable behavior that made him easy to manipulate. The cab dropped him off at Murphy's Pub, a popular after-work hangout for the corporate crowd. I parked across the street and waited, knowing that alcohol would make Richard even more unpredictable and desperate. My phone rang at 10:30. The caller ID showed Lena's number. "Gray, we need to talk. I'm listening." Richard called me. He's not handling this well. That's not my problem anymore. He's talking about revenge, about exposing company secrets, going to the media, making things difficult for everyone. I smiled in the darkness of my car. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Richard making threats that would justify even harsher countermeasures. What kind of revenge? I don't know. He was drunk and rambling. Something about having dirt on you. About proving you manipulated the whole situation. Interesting. What did you tell him? I told him to leave me alone. I told him I was done with all of it. Smart choice. Gray, I'm scared. He seemed unhinged. What if he does something crazy? Then he'll face the consequences just like you did. Just like everyone does eventually. There was a long pause on the line. You're different now, she said finally. Colder. I'm exactly the same person I always was. You just never bothered to pay attention before. After hanging up, I continued my surveillance of Murphy's Pub. Through the windows, I could see Richard at the bar, gesturing animatedly to anyone who would listen. He was making a spectacle of himself, exactly as I'd predicted. At 11:15, he stumbled out of the pub and began walking unsteadily down the sidewalk. I got out of my car and followed on foot, staying in the shadows cast by the Christmas decorations that adorned every street light. Richard was heading toward the city square, where the annual holiday market was still in full swing despite the late hour. Vendors were closing their booths, but plenty of people were still milling around, enjoying the festive atmosphere and the falling snow. I quickened my pace. Sensing an opportunity, Richard was so drunk and distracted that he didn't notice me approaching until I was right beside him. When he finally looked up and saw my face, his expression shifted from confusion to rage in an instant. "You," he snarled loud enough to attract attention from nearby shoppers. "You bastard. You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything, Richard. I just documented what you'd already done. You set me up. You planned this whole thing. I planned to protect my employees from an intimate predator. Mission accomplished." He swung at me then, a wild, drunken haymaker that I easily avoided by stepping to the side. Richard's momentum carried him forward, and he crashed into a display of Christmas trees, sending pine needles and ornaments flying everywhere. The crowd that had gathered began laughing and pointing. Several people pulled out their phones to record the spectacle. Richard struggled to his feet, covered in fake snow and tinsel, looking like a demented holiday decoration himself. "This isn't over," he screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "I'll destroy you. I'll destroy your company. He slipped on the scattered ornaments and went down hard, landing in a pile of artificial snow that immediately stuck to his expensive suit. The laughter from the crowd grew louder, and I could see the videos being uploaded to social media in real time. "Merry Christmas, Richard," I said quietly, then turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear him still ranting and threatening, his words slurred by alcohol and humiliation. Security guards from the holiday market were approaching to deal with the disturbance, and I had no doubt that Richard's evening was about to get even worse. As I drove home through the snow-covered streets, I reflected on how perfectly everything was falling into place. Richard was self-destructing in spectacular fashion, providing me with even more ammunition for the final phase of my plan. Lena was beginning to understand the full scope of what she'd lost, and Maya was desperately trying to save herself by betraying everyone around her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, I was content to watch my enemies tear each other apart while I remained safely in the shadows, pulling the strings like a puppet master, orchestrating the perfect revenge. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp. I'd called it the night before, after Richard's public meltdown at the holiday market had gone viral on social media. The videos were everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, showing the former CEO of a major corporation face-planting into a Christmas tree display while screaming threats at his replacement. The conference room was packed. All 5 board members were present, along with Patricia Williams, our legal counsel, and a stenographer to document everything officially. I'd also invited key department heads and a representative from our public relations firm. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about the future of the company. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began standing at the head of the polished table, "we're here to address a serious threat to our organization's reputation and stability." I clicked the remote and the wall screen came to life with a compilation of social media posts from the previous evening. Richard's drunken rant, his assault on the Christmas tree display, his wild threats about destroying the company. It was all there in high-definition embarrassment. Our former CEO has made it clear that he intends to wage a campaign of harassment and intimidation against this company and its employees. This meeting is to discuss our response and to present additional evidence that has come to light. Margaret Santos leaned forward. What kind of additional evidence? The kind that changes everything, I replied, clicking to the next slide. Maya Chen's face appeared on screen. Not a professional headshot, but a security camera image from 3 days ago. She was in Richard's office after hours, not for a romantic encounter, but for something far more damaging to the company. Corporate espionage. I announced Maya Chen has been feeding confidential information to our competitors for the past 6 months. Client lists, pricing strategies, product development plans. She's been selling everything to Dataflow Industries for a monthly retainer of $5,000. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia Williams was already taking notes, her pen flying across the legal pad. How did you discover this? David Kim asked. Miles Abrams, our new head of IT security, has been conducting a comprehensive audit of our digital infrastructure. Maya's communications were encrypted, but not well enough to hide from someone with military intelligence training. I clicked through several more slides showing email chains, bank deposits, and file transfer logs. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But that's not the most interesting part, I continued. The most interesting part is who she was working with. The next slide showed Richard's financial records, payments from Dataflow Industries dating back 8 months, long before his termination. He'd been selling out his own company while simultaneously harassing his female employees. Richard Drayton wasn't just an intimate predator, I said. He was also a corporate traitor, systematically undermining this company for personal profit. Maya Chen was his inside accomplice, feeding him information that he could sell to our competitors. The board members looked stunned. Even our experienced legal counsel seemed shocked by the scope of the betrayal. There's more, I said, advancing to the next slide. They were planning to frame me. The screen showed a series of text messages between Maya and Richard discussing how to plant evidence that would make me appear to be an abusive husband seeking revenge against an innocent wife. They'd planned to claim that my acquisition of the company was motivated by domestic violence rather than legitimate business concerns. They were going to destroy my reputation to cover their own crimes, I explained. Make me look like the villain while they played the victims. Patricia Williams looked up from her notes. This changes our legal strategy completely. We're not just dealing with harassment anymore. We're dealing with corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. Exactly. Which brings us to today's agenda. The conference room door opened, and 2 security guards entered, flanking Maya Chen. She looked terrified, her usual confidence completely shattered. Behind them came Richard, handcuffed and accompanied by 2 police officers. What the hell is this? Richard demanded, his voice from the previous night's drinking and shouting. This is justice, I replied calmly. Maya, Richard, you're both under arrest for corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. The FBI will be taking over the investigation from here. Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the nearest chair. Gray, please, I can explain. You already did explain in your encrypted emails to Dataflow Industries, in your bank records showing regular payments for industrial espionage, in your text messages planning to frame me for domestic abuse. Richard was struggling against his handcuffs, his face red with rage. You can't do this. This is entrapment. This is what happens when you betray the people who trusted you, I interrupted. When you sell out your own company for profit. When you think you're smarter than everyone else in the room. The police officers began reading Miranda rights as the board members watched in stunned silence. This wasn't how corporate meetings usually ended. But then again, this hadn't been a usual situation from the beginning. The company's reputation will recover, I announced to the room. We're the victims here, not the perpetrators. We're the organization that uncovered corporate espionage and took decisive action to protect our stakeholders. As Maya and Richard were led away in handcuffs, I noticed Lena standing in the doorway. She'd arrived just in time to see her former lover and enabler being arrested for federal crimes. "Did you know?" she asked quietly, approaching the conference table. "About the espionage?" I suspected about the plan to frame me. That was a surprise, but not a shocking one. I never knew about any of it. The selling information, the conspiracy. I thought it was just about the affair. Maybe. Or maybe you're smarter than you're pretending to be, just like I was. She flinched at the comparison. What happens now? Now you go back to your cubicle and do your job. You keep your head down, work hard, and try to rebuild some semblance of a career. You're lucky you weren't involved in the espionage. That would have been a federal crime instead of just a personal betrayal. And us? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had shared my bed and my life, who had thrown it all away for a predator and a criminal. She looked older now, worn down by the events of the past few days, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd lost. There is no us anymore, Lena. There's you trying to salvage what's left of your dignity. And there's me running a company and moving on with my life. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't erase the security footage or the lies or the 18 months of betrayal." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, and walked away without another word. The conference room was buzzing with activity as board members, lawyers, and PR representatives discussed the implications of the morning's revelations. The company would survive. In fact, it would probably emerge stronger than before, with a reputation for integrity and decisive leadership. I walked to the window overlooking the city square, where workers were cleaning up the remnants of last night's holiday market. The Christmas tree display that Richard had destroyed was being replaced with a fresh arrangement of pine and ornaments. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. "FBI raid on Dataflow Industries underway. Looks like your evidence package was very thorough." I smiled, watching the snow fall gently on the city below. It had been a long journey from that humiliating Christmas party to this moment of complete victory. Richard was facing federal charges that would likely result in years in prison. Maya's career was destroyed, and she'd be lucky to avoid jail time herself. Lena was starting over from the bottom, her reputation in ruins, and her marriage over. And I was standing in the corner office of a company I now owned outright, having eliminated every threat to my authority and my future. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Foster, there's a reporter from the Business Journal on line 1. She wants to discuss your heroic efforts to uncover corporate espionage." "Tell her I'll be right with her," I replied. As I walked back to my desk to take the call, I reflected on the lessons learned over the past few days. Trust was earned, not given. Power was taken, not granted. And revenge, when properly executed, was indeed best served cold. The reporter wanted to know how I discovered the espionage, how I'd managed to gather such comprehensive evidence, how I'd maintained my composure throughout such a difficult situation. "Just doing my job," I told her. "Protecting the company and its stakeholders from those who would exploit their trust." "Some people are calling you a hero," she said. "I'm just a businessman who believes in accountability," I replied. "When people betray that trust, there have to be consequences." After the interview, I sat back in my chair and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was in a federal holding cell, probably still trying to figure out how his perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly. Maya was consulting with a criminal defense attorney, realizing that her cooperation with the investigation was her only hope of avoiding serious prison time. And Lena was in her cubicle, surrounded by the whispers and stares of colleagues who now knew exactly what kind of person she really was. I opened my laptop and began drafting a company-wide memo about the morning's events, the arrests, and the new security measures that would be implemented to prevent future betrayals. It was important to control the narrative, to ensure that everyone understood who the real victims were in this situation. Dear team, I began typing. This morning's events demonstrate our company's unwavering commitment to integrity and transparency. We will not tolerate corporate espionage, harassment, or any other form of betrayal. As I wrote, I couldn't help but smile. They'd all underestimated me. Richard with his arrogance, Maya with her greed, Lena with her ambition. They'd seen what they wanted to see. The quiet, understanding husband who would never fight back. They'd never bothered to learn who I really was underneath the facade. They'd never asked about my military background, my intelligence training, my ability to plan complex operations and execute them flawlessly. Their mistake, my victory. The phone rang again. Another reporter, another opportunity to shape the story. I answered with confidence, ready to explain once again how a dedicated CEO had uncovered a web of corruption and brought the perpetrators to justice. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in pristine white. It was going to be a beautiful day.